Welcome to the Inventory Professional Podcast, brought to you by Inventory Base, providers of industry-leading property inspection software, accredited training, and on-demand property reports. Join us as we discuss the latest news, legislation, and all things property, hosted by our very own inventory expert, Sián Metcalf. With regular special guests, listen in to our open and honest discussions about the role of the inventory professional and how to navigate through this ever-changing, fast-paced industry.
So welcome to the Inventory Professional. My name is Sián from Inventory Base Academy, and I'm joined with my co-host, Melissa from MGN Inventories. Hi, Melissa. Thanks for joining us yet again.
Hello, pleased to be here.
Brilliant. Today's podcast is all about getting ready for the easing of lockdown. It's all in the news. It's all over the papers. There's so much conversation going on about it, quite rightly, because it's exciting stuff, isn't it? When you think about it, we're finally, hopefully, maybe getting there. We're coming out.
Fingers crossed, yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. It's exciting to even have something in principle. You know, I think a lot of people are fairly realistic, like it might not go exactly to plan, but to have that roadmap, to have something to work towards, I think is positive for everyone.
Oh, without a doubt. And from the point of view of just kind of getting a map of some sort, some kind of structure to understand what we're going to be doing, where we're going to be going, you know, how long it might take. And I know everything's got to be taken with a huge pinch of salt, because the government was saying yesterday, yes, the step 1 to step 4 is there. The dates that they've put in from the 9th of March onwards to hopefully the 21st of June are aims and goals, but they're not set in stone.
No, that's it. And I think a lot of that as well is based on the human factor. So there will be some people that here, you know, will be eased, hopefully, finally from 21st of June, and just think, oh, well, if it's then, it might as well be now, and go about and do things slightly differently, and then the infection rate will go up. And as much as they're trying to predict it, they won't be entirely sure, which I think is what the 4-week delay in between each phase is. But I think it works for us in both ways. It's something to work towards, but it's something to be cautious of as well. We don't want to commit and overstretch ourselves on the basis that we might be able to do certain things from, you know, different points, and then that be taken away and almost be the bad guy with, you know, agents and landlords to say that things have to change. Because whilst that wouldn't be down to us, we're just following the rules. I think once you have committed to something, for example, you know, if you have agents or landlords and you commit to a lot of inspections, if the goals change and the phases change, and we are the ones saying, actually, now we've got to cancel a lot of them, it almost comes back on us, you know, even though it's not our responsibility.
I get exactly what you mean. In a way, we would be held accountable for that, but you're quite right. We've got to make sure that we, one, are following the guidelines from the government, following the rules, the regulations, the law in regards to what is happening with the pandemic, make sure we follow the steps, but equally, like you said, make sure our clients are fully aware of what our protocols are, which is why I think when we talked about the podcast beforehand, Melissa, I think we need to be very clear exactly what we're saying here, that I think it's right now, certainly from a business point of view, you've got your business, I've got my business, and we also talk to clerks, and we've got the Inventory Base and Inventory Base Academy. We need to get people to start thinking about, okay, well, as we ease out and we've got all of these steps that we're going to be looking to adhere to and also be hopeful for that they will actually be carried out, what are we going to do from our business point of view? What do we have to think about to get, like you said, our clients ready, get those expectations very firmly kind of written down almost, so that if A happens, then B happens, but if C happens, then D will happen, if that makes any sense. So we've got to be very clear exactly what we're going to be doing with our businesses and how we're going to be getting our businesses eased through the lockdown and post-lockdown process. And for me, I don't know about you, Melissa, but I've been thinking about protocols and PPE and what that means as we go through the different steps.
Yes, exactly the same. I've been thinking about, you know, how it impacts me personally, how it will impact the business. and really what my interpretation is of the phases and how I want to implement that. And I think as inventory professionals, we need to be very clear in our own mind what it is that we are maybe asking of clients, landlords, agents, and what we want as well, before maybe starting those conversations and trying to set expectations. We need to be quite clear what we're happy with and what we're comfortable with before starting that dialogue, just so we don't necessarily get sucked into something that actually then we regret afterwards.
Yeah, I agree. That's been one of my concerns, and one of the things I've been thinking about is that whole issue of pressure, because, you know, understandably, everybody wants to get business back on track. Everyone wants to be out there working, earning. And to be fair, you know, from a housing point of view, from the industry point of view, we've done really, really well. The fact that we've been allowed to continue. Yes, we've had certain protocols to adhere to, but no different, I don't think, you know, to anybody else. And in some respects, I think we've done quite well in regards to being allowed to operate, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're not going to be worried about things. And certainly I've spoken to a few clerks in the last few days, and there are some really genuine concerns as to whether there's going to be an expectation that just because the government has got this roadmap and we're easing out, that everybody will just say, well, okay, that's it, great, business is normal, you know, we're just going to get back.
Free for all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, have tenants at checkouts, we're going to have interims, you're going to be straight back into properties, etc. And that's not the case. So I think now's the time, before we literally get to step one, which is effectively due to kind of start around about the 29th of March, depending again what numbers look like, as to what we're going to do from a business point of view, so that we can look after ourselves as business individuals, look after our businesses, look after our clerks we work with. I mean, I work with self-employed clerks, and I want to make sure that they feel safe and happy. And I want to make sure that my clients are very much aware of what my protocols are, so they can plan, because that's the other thing as well, isn't it? When you think about it, they've got to plan around us as well.
Yes, that's it. I do think a lot of clients will almost think, oh, it's, you know, it's completely back to normal. I mean, we touched before on previous podcasts that maybe expectations of us are different from expectations of their staff in the office. And I think that this might be a similar case, that they'll be expecting things to be pretty much back to normal, and it's, you know, it's us and our businesses that are taking the impact of that, which is why, you know, again, I think we need to be very clear about what we're happy with going forward.
I agree, especially when it comes to the whole issue of being at the end of that particular chain. The fact that businesses, the agents, the landlords, the tenants, everyone wants to get everybody back in the houses, get the numbers up, get the revenue generating. And because we're kind of like last in line in the lettings process, which is fine, which is exactly where we want to be, because we don't want to be doing reports and then having cleaners and everybody else come after us. You know, we want to be last in line, but it does mean we're under a bit of pressure from a time point of view to get reports done, get in, get done, get out, but also then to manage the expectations, as we were saying earlier on, of the landlord and of the tenant, especially at the checkout process. So I think with the time we've got now is to really think about what we're all going to be doing. And certainly one of the things I will be doing after this podcast, I will be drawing up a blog and putting a lot of this down into writing as well. So if listeners want that information, that will be available on Inventory Base in our blog section. But I thought it'd be a great way to structure what we're saying is to look at the steps and look at what it means for us as inventory professionals. So if you look at the first step, that is effectively due to start from the 29th of March. So that basically means, from a social interaction point of view, there's going to be no interaction indoors except for households, and if there is going to be any interaction, then it has to be outside of the house. So when you think about that, so if you look at that in its very bare form, that means then we are still going to have to be maintaining a zero contact policy. Would you agree with that, Melissa, or how do you feel about that?
That's exactly my interpretation as well, is that for us, and what we do, it's business as usual, that the new usual, that won't be in contact with people. It's still limited. We wouldn't be having people at checkouts doing inspections. I think that is worthwhile managing again, the expectations, because I think people will see the rule of 6 or 2 and it will kind of be interpreted that it can be indoors, and, you know, weather dependent, meeting tenants outdoors to have a chat about things socially distanced is fine, but indoors, that's still something that we can't do.
No, exactly. So I think from a protocol point of view, each of us looking at our business, looking at our protocols we've got currently in place at the moment, is revisiting those now and saying, okay, well, what do I need to still keep in place? So the government hasn't relaxed PPE, hasn't relaxed the need for masks at this stage. They haven't relaxed the requirement to be socially distanced, certainly 2 meters or 1 meter if you've got no choice, depending on your environment. So again, that basically says to me, we stick with where we are at the moment. We don't change. We're not having tenants there at checkout, but we'll obviously make sure we explain that and explain why. But most people understand that. I've never really, to be honest with you, had any pushback on that. Have you?
No, no, not really. I think tenants who are worried about their deposit, they need that reassurance of what the process is, that they, you know, they'll get a copy of the report and that kind of thing. And I think talking through each of those steps tends to ease people's worries. I've not had too many people sort of insist that they're around. I've had a particularly anxious tenant that insisted on waiting outdoors, which was absolutely fine. They could wait until I was finished and then we discussed it afterwards. But I think it's been going on a year now, hasn't it? I think people are pretty much au fait with what's going on, and I don't think too many people are pushing back on it. Or will be the time that starts to happen.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's going to happen a few stages further on. But certainly for the moment, everything is effectively as it was yesterday, the day before, and it's going to be no different certainly for that first step. And certainly looking at the government guidelines, you know, the travel advice is stay at home, you know, work from home if you can. You should only be working from outside of the home or away from home if you've got no choice, which we are within that category. So that side of things for me hasn't changed. So when we look at step 2, which is effectively hopefully coming in from the 12th of April, and again, huge caveat, and you can't see me doing this, but I'm doing the whole kind of like inverted commas sign to say that, you know, this may be changing. So 12th of April is exactly where the government would like to be, but not necessarily saying it will be. The rule in regards to meeting of people then changes slightly. We go back to the rule of 6, but then again, that's still outdoors. That's not indoors. And again, indoors is basically only households, which I would argue we are not part of a household as clerks, as people visiting the home. So therefore, again, that for me means that our protocols don't change. Is that
yes? Yeah, exactly my thoughts.
And certainly from the travel point of view, what they are saying is, again, you should be working from home where possible, and that travel, even though is going to be eased somewhat, people, the ability to stay overnight, again, will only be within, like I said, the household. And certainly from a clerk point of view, I don't see any change, except for the fact is that we will then start to see more traffic on the roads. I was actually out today doing a checkout, and I have noticed that the actual road usage, the amount of cars, the amount of people out and about has definitely increased. And I'm not saying just from yesterday, but I've been noticing it for the last month or so, that it's been gradually getting busier and busier and busier.
Yes, the same. I think the first lockdown, the roads were completely empty. I barely saw a soul, and I think the second and the third one, it's been busier, but certainly since after Christmas, there's been a marked increase in people out on the roads. I think a lot of employers are taking steps to, allow people to come to the office and properly socially distance, whereas before I think a few of them were sort of saying, well, you can stay at home, work from home, because they weren't necessarily taking steps to make the office ready. But the longer everything's went on, I think people have then adapted and made those changes, and maybe that's what the difference is, that more people are being asked to go into work.
Yeah, I've certainly seen a higher number of people working in agencies, not just the ones that, I personally work with, but certainly talking to other people, and even just noticing, when out and about, doing the role of a professional inventory clerk, you will see other agents and you see them open and you'll see the people inside. So there definitely has seen a marked increase in people at the offices on the high street, in the agents' offices working. So you can definitely see a gradual increase there. So again, looking at it from a PPE point of view, looking at it from a protocol point of view, I'm not seeing any real changes for like steps 1 and steps 2. But when we get to step 3, which again the government is hoping it's going to be the 17th of May, then the activities and the rule of 6 changes. So the rule of 6, it goes indoors, but you can also have like more than 2 households, but the social contact increases. So what the government is saying is the maximum is 30 people outdoors. So again, we're still in that realm of, well, our role is within the property, so therefore you would argue there really shouldn't be anybody else there. You've got the rule of 6 or 2 households indoors, which again, we wouldn't be part of a household indoors, but then you've got the rule of 6. So you've got to be thinking, okay, well, how do I feel about that as a clerk? How do I feel about potentially having another person in the property at checkout, or of course interim if you're taking those up, and what your protocol looks like? How are you going to manage that particular conversation with not only the client but also with the tenant, with the agent, and also thinking about your clerks as well. I don't know about you, Melissa, but my first thoughts are, well, how are they going to feel? What are they going to be wanting to do? Making sure that they're part of that conversation as well, because it's not for me necessarily to make arbitrary protocols and say this is what we're going to do. I need to have that conversation and make those in conjunction with them, because at the end of the day, if they're not happy, they're not safe, or they don't feel safe and they don't feel comfortable, then we're going to have a problem in regards to the working side of it.
Yes, certainly. And from that personal point of view, that everyone's circumstances are different and they'll have reasons why they'd be happy or not happy to do things anyway. If they've got a relative that's, shielding, self-isolating, that will come into play as well. So I think, like we're saying, it isn't sort of a black and white, right? It's the 17th of May. We can do checkouts, we can do interim visits. It will be almost sort of a personal job by job basis, really. And like we say, for overcommitting, you don't necessarily want to be taking on, say, a bunch of inspections and have someone in the team then fall poorly and have overcommitted to something as well.
Exactly, yeah. So I definitely would say to all our listeners, talk to your staff. It's not just about what the agent wants or the landlord wants or the tenant wants, it's also what your staff wants, what your businesses are able to provide. Because at the end of the day, my view is, without our staff, we don't have a business. So we've got to make sure that they feel happy, comfortable, they understand the protocols, and you work with them. And I think certainly from a business point of view, we've got to decide, what does that all look like and what will we decide to do on a collective basis. So if you've maybe got a couple of clerks who, for whatever reason, for shielding, for other issues or comfort or whatever, feel that no, they really can't have people there at checkout, then you can't really have some that do and some that don't, because then your service level changes and it's very difficult. So I think you then have to make a conscious and business decision as to what you will and won't do, convey that with the agent, but not by just saying this is what I'm going to do, explaining why, explaining what you're trying to do in regards to keeping everybody safe, everybody feeling comfortable, giving the best service possible, but within the realms of making sure that we're sticking, 1, to the guidelines, but 2, making sure that we're looking after all of our staff, whether they're employed, self-employed, makes no difference. We have an equal responsibility under health and safety.
Yes, I would hope that the majority of people would be quite sympathetic to that stance anyway. If the thought process is that we're not going to be doing checkouts and inspections at this stage, and like you say, you've explained your reasons, I think most people would be reasonable as to appreciating why. And again, this is a very new to us. It's only happened yesterday that it's been announced. So I think most people are slightly anxious within themselves anyway. So I would imagine everyone would be quite reasonable to that sort of let's play it by ear. And it might be that you don't say, okay, well, this is, this will be our stance until 21st of June or whatever foreseeable point in the future. But let's sort of play it on a week by week basis and see how things are progressing, because, things with the government could change at any point. So it's worthwhile us maybe not committing to certain periods of time, and to keep it under constant review for what we're happy with, what members of the team are happy with.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a good way of looking at it, is that keeping it under that constant review. Obviously, you've got to work with some kind of protocol. You've got to have some method of getting back to normal, aligned with what the government advice is. And I think that's the key thing, certainly from my point of view, is adhering to that government advice that is led by the science, that is led by the facts, the figures around, the pandemic, how it's behaving, and just making sure that everybody's safe. And if that is your overriding priority, then everything else is built on top of that. So therefore, certainly from a protocol, from a business point of view, then hopefully we're hitting all the right markers, we're doing the right thing for the right reasons, for the right people. And just like you said, reviewing it constantly, not taking your foot off the pedal and thinking, well, just because the government says we're at step 3, we can just do what we want, or client says, oh, well, everything is fine, this is what I'm doing and I want you to do exactly the same. You've got to be very kind of clear exactly where your parameters are, what your protocols are, and what you want to do, and then make sure that's communicated. And I think that's the biggest thing. And to be fair, I think all the way through this, I think communication, certainly from my point of view, has improved dramatically. I think we've communicated so much more on different levels and really appreciated what each other are doing in regards to both our roles within the housing industry and talking to agents and landlords and tenants, but also I think the wider business kind of sectors, where I think we've realized that we don't necessarily need to just to work and think about our own little section, our own little corner. I think we've collaborated more, we've spoken more, communicated more, been more open and more responsive, and also more helping towards each other.
Yes, it's certainly brought forward things that were never really prominent before, and now conversations are had. And certainly with the very first lockdown, everyone was very anxious. No one was really sort of knowing what was going to happen. And like you say, those conversations now, and I feel like relationships have been built and are better because of it, because we've had that dialogue going along, and I think that it shows an element of trust as well. We're all talking to each other. We're reviewing it step by step, and they knew what to expect of us, we knew what to expect of them, and it's finding that balance in between.
Yeah, and I think that's worked really well. I certainly, obviously, I can talk from my own client's point of view. I think communication's been absolutely brilliant. Support has been absolutely brilliant. There's been a lot of understanding, especially when you've had clerks having to self-isolate, not be available, and it's everybody's kind of like looked at, well, okay, well, how can we work around this? What can we do to get to the collective end, to the point we need to be at, how are we going to manage that, and everybody just kind of like jumping in. And I think certainly from my point of view, I'm hoping that's one thing we don't lose out of this, because all of the trials and tribulations over the last 12 months, and a bit longer, effectively, when you think about it, because we're officially a year in when you think about it, but equally it feels like it's been longer than that we don't lose all the benefits that we've actually derived from it. Like I said, the communication, the trust, the working flexibly, especially from working from home. I mean, not so much for us because we do that anyway, but for a lot of businesses, this is new. Especially, I think we were talking earlier on, weren't we, about agents working from home, and now they're having to come back into the office and how they're feeling about things.
Absolutely. I can imagine there will be a lot of nervous people going back in. It's all very well for the phase to say, it'd be step 3, and maybe more employers ask people to come to the office, but how they sort of feel about that and how that affects them on a day-to-day basis, I think that will have an impact as well.
Yeah, so I think it's right that we all are concerned about how everybody's going to be, not just for us, for our businesses, but so all for the clients, for the lettings process, and everybody involved in that, the whole underpinning supplier industry. Because at the end of the day, we're all human, we've all got families, we've all got worries, concerns. Some people are dealing with underlying health issues, or they've got members of family who have. So there's a bigger issue and a wider issue about not just about working and everything that benefits that bring, i.e. earning, paying bills, etc., but also the health and the mental health side of things as well. So I think we all need to be attuned to that and make sure that we're fully aware, and we're doing our best to understand that and make sure that as we think about our protocols, what we're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis as we go through steps 1, 2, 3 and into 4, that we've got all those at the forefront of our mind, so that not only we're given a brilliant service, brilliant reports, and very efficient service, but we're also taking into account the human element of it. Because at the end of the day, we could equally go through any of these steps and then actually end up back to square one again. Because I think one thing the government is very clear of is that each step has got this 5-week kind of like timeline, because they need that data, they need that information to be able to understand, is this working, is it working effectively? But if we see numbers go up, if we see the death rates increase or the pressures on the NHS through more cases, then we are literally going to go back to square one, because that's the only choice.
Yes, I think so. And like we say, is the human element. What we're hoping is that people don't see the steps now and think, well, it's February and we'll be back to normal in June, so I'm just going to do the things that I want to do now, and the virus rates step up again, so we have to go back. I know Boris Johnson has said that he doesn't want to take steps back, but that is the only response if the infection rates go back up again. So it's still everyone playing their part. And like we touched on with the PPE, I mean, I personally feel that I'll be using it until I've had both of my vaccines. So from that point of view, we need to be doing our part and not be blasé about it. And then hopefully, if everyone is on board with that, then things will be okay by June 21st. I mean, I don't know what the planned rollout is for the vaccinations for the wider public, after those at risk and shielding. I know they've said that it's going to be sooner than what they had thought, which I think I recall was going to be September. But again, that's a lot of people for them to get through. It's a lot of worry for people not going in for their second vaccination, which I think they're already touching on, that they're slightly worried people might not be doing that. And that will have an impact as well. If people have had the first one, if they don't go in and have their second one, then that could put us back a few steps as well. So fingers crossed it's all going to be over and done with by June, the summer, even maybe the end of the year, if that's kind of worst case scenario, if we do keep going back. But in between times, I think, personally, it's almost as though we're exactly as we were yesterday. I'm just going to continue in that fashion, sort of going forward. And yes, things will change. From my point of view, from the 17th of May, having tenants and landlords at checkouts and interim visits, even in those circumstances, I think you've got to work with what you're happy with. So whilst I might agree that they can be present, I'll certainly want us to be socially distanced. I'll be wearing PPE, and I would ask them to be in a different room at a different time from myself. And as we said, as long as you are explaining those reasons behind it, I think most people would be understanding and reasonable of those conditions.
No, I agree with you. And I think also, when you think about it, we've learned a lot over these last 12 months and what we can do differently. And, there could be, and maybe there should be, a wider debate as to whether the way we've been handling it, the fact that a tenant isn't there in inventory, that the way that the check-ins are being handled, especially because they're already looking at changing the guidance for smoke and carbon monoxide alarms not having to be tested at the point of check-in, because if you think about it from inventory professional point of view, we're already doing that at inventory, we're doing that at checkout, we're doing that at interim. So we're already kind of like making sure that the alarms are either there, emitting an audible tone, or if they're not there or not emitting the tone, that they're being managed by the either the property manager, landlord or agent. So we're advising them. So where the real benefit is to have the tenant there to do that. Then the second thing is, with interim inspections, we've got now the ability of inventory base to have tenant self-service inspections. We also have live inspections, which then helps with the issue of, well, a tenant could, if they want to, maybe skirt over some of the issues, maybe not showcase the property correctly. Whereas with a live inspection, then it's the inventory professional, the property manager on the other end of the video, talking with the tenant, getting them to walk around. So then if there's still a concern, then maybe then a actual physical visit might be appropriate and recommended. So that's fine. So you've got two more options than we had, say this time last year. And then with the checkout, have we seen any marked difference in regards to a higher level of disputes because the tenant hasn't been at the checkout? Has it been less? What does that look like? And obviously that's going to take a little bit of time to compile, but could we have that as a model going forward, because that's worked well? That's another thing to think about, isn't it?
That's it. All of the things that we've been through have changed our practices, and some of it actually might be for the better. And now, like you say, with the tenants not necessarily being at checkouts, I think a lot of people will just take that as the norm now, and they won't be bothered about being there for future. And a lot of that is based on trust. If you're going to do what you said you're going to do, they're going to get a copy of the report, and they feel that they've got a chance to respond or tell you anything beforehand, whether over the phone or leave you a little note, and that be considered. Then there's no reason for people to be really worried about not being in inspections, checkouts. But again, we'll know that further down the line if things come up with disputes. I mean, unfortunately, it might be one of those things that during the dispute adjudication, it sort of gets thrown into the mix anyway as something, another point to make. Well, I wasn't there for the checkout, as opposed to it actually being an issue, that was a problem for the checkout report.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing that we in a way, we need a way of kind of like looking at that, of surveying that, of mapping that, as to say, 12 months ago, this is like maybe the dispute level, this is the dispute level now. What are the key issues that are coming forward? Is that, as you say, something that's been highlighted, or is it not? And also then looking at the mechanisms for making sure that tenants, quite rightly, have all the ability to have their say. So they can comment on the checkout, make sure that they get a copy of the checkout, they know when to expect it, they've been given the opportunity to leave a note, or just tell you about things in regards to what you might come across at checkout when you're making the phone call to them to confirm that the checkout's going ahead, i.e. when's your tenancy date. Are you going to be handing over keys? Yes, you can't stay, but please do let me know if there's any kind of issues or anything you want us to know or be aware of. And that's certainly a conversation I know I have each and every time we talk about checkouts. But we can automate that. We're able, certainly with the inventory-based system, to be able to give them a pre-checkout report where they can highlight the issues, they can put down in writing exactly where issues have been, they can photograph them, they've got the ability there. So when you think about it, if we give everybody the tools to be able to manage that process well, then realistically, where are the actual benefits of having a physical person there, and do they outweigh the safety element for both the tenant and for the inventory professional being in close proximity, not really understanding or knowing whether you or I or them have had a vaccination? Because at the end of the day, it's a personal choice. It's a medical choice for some. Therefore, it's not something that we quite rightly should be privy to. If the tenant wants to tell us, or we want to tell the tenant, that's up to us. But at the end of the day, that's a private matter. So when you think about it, if either of us are asymptomatic and we're not wearing PPE, then are we not putting each other at risk? So therefore, if you reduce or eliminate that risk with having a no contact checkout, but having all of those different potential options in regards to tenants giving over details, etc., then surely that is a better model going forward. But again, we need a way of measuring that, of understanding that, finding out, is that working? How do tenants feel about it? Because one thing that sometimes really annoys me personally, as well as from a business point of view, is the fact that tenants are often forgotten. They're forgotten that, you know, it's their money, it's their deposit. They've got a right to get that deposit back, unless, of course, there's been any damage or any issues over and above their wear and tear. So therefore, they should be included in the conversation. And sometimes I feel that they're sidelined a bit.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that it's quite easily done with landlords, agents, almost when a tenant's given notice or landlord's given notice, sort of the end goal there is to then just get everything moving, you know, have the tenant move out, have viewings, get a new tenant in. And very rarely is the tenant that's leaving pulled into that equation to really be told, you know, what's going to happen and have that dialogue with them. And like you say, we're lucky that we get to talk to them to arrange the checkouts and have those conversations. But it is something that needs to be worked on more, so we can fully understand, you know, where they're coming from, and again that they've got the peace of mind of what we're doing, and then we'll know if our practices can be changed for the better, you know, how things can be moved forward to try and incorporate it to be best for everyone.
Yeah, well, exactly, because the one thing that always kind of gets me is the fact that as the lettings process, if you don't have anybody wanting to rent in the property, then you don't have a lettings process, because someone needs to be going in there to be able to let it, which then generates a revenue for the agent, for the landlord, somewhere for the tenant to live, work and prosper, and be happy and content with, and treat the property as their home. So without them, none of that happens. So therefore, I think sometimes the mindset of how tenants are treated, and I can attest to that because currently I am a tenant, and I've experienced sometimes less of a service than I have done as a landlord, which I've equally been, and also a homeowner. So sometimes I think that balance needs to be addressed. But I think if we could do it in a positive way and not just be a case of, well, either the landlord's bad, agent's bad, or the tenant's bad, but we look at it, okay, what can we do to make it better, make everybody happy? That to me makes a lot of sense.
Yes, absolutely. And I think a lot of the time I'll have a tenant make a comment and I will put that on the checkout report, and an agent will say, oh, you know, don't say that because actually this was addressed at this point, or this was addressed at that point, and it's not relevant. But if it's something that they're saying and they want to be included, then again, we've said the end user is the deposit scheme, the adjudicator. So if it isn't relevant and they are going to make a judgment on it, you know, you have the opportunity to say this wasn't something that necessary in the report, or it was already addressed at that time. But I think almost by cancelling out what the tenant's telling you and not putting it in, again, builds that distrust. And it's not for the agents or landlords to say that it's wrong. We're not saying that they are absolutely 100% right. If the tenant says, oh no, that, you know, that burn mark was on the carpet and it just wasn't on the inventory, we can still put in their comments and we can still add things in. And I've seen a lot of that where it's almost silenced at that stage because they think that, again, it's been addressed or it's irrelevant. But from my point of view, those are things that I still add in the tenant's comments because it is important.
Yeah, and it also goes very much down to our impartiality as providers, because then we are not seen as trying to side with one particular party or the other. We're saying exactly what we see, and we're recording exactly what we hear and what we've been asked to note. And I think that is our role. And I think if we can do that and do that effectively, then, as you quite rightly say, the adjudicator, the deposit dispute service, will have all of the information, all of the evidence that they need to make a fair and impartial judgment. And I think if we've got to showcase the fact that that's exactly what we are, we're impartial, that we are not picking and choosing, like effectively cherry picking what information does or doesn't go forward towards, you know, the deposit adjudicator, to the landlord, to the property manager, or even back to the tenant. Obviously, there's some, you know, reasons, you know, certainly from maybe a legal point of view, etc. You can't just say all and then wait to see what the consequences are, but you can certainly make sure that if a tenant says, can you note this, or want you to be aware of that, then you should record it, should make it available, and then people can make their own judgment. So I think certainly one thing the pandemic has done is made us look at our processes, look at how we actually manage lettings and how we manage certainly the checkout process and the evidence process. And hopefully we've seen some improvements for that. But I do think we could do with a much bigger kind of understanding of what that looks on a national, regional, or regional national level, so that we can get some best practice from it, so we don't lose all of that learning, all of that change that has been for the positive, because I think there's been enough negative this year and last year. I think now what we need to do is learn from what we've gone through the last 12 months, certainly from a business point of view, certainly from an inventory professional point of view, and build on that. Don't lose that focus, because I think there's been some brilliant work, some brilliant people, a lot of good initiatives that have come out of this whole terrible crisis. And if we can pick little things from that we can take forward, then at least there'll be some positives that we can have out of the experience.
That's it. It's just building on everything that we've learned. So hopefully we don't just revert back to, ourselves, landlords and agents, the same things that have always happened, and then this is a distant memory. It would be good to take these things forward with us.
Yeah, I totally agree. So key takeaways, Melissa, what would you say going forward inventory professionals should be thinking about now in regards to the steps and their business protocols?
I think that everyone should be thinking how they personally feel about it, how they interpret the steps, what they would be happy to do within each of those steps, and be clear in your own minds what you're comfortable with and your reasons for that before you start talking to your clients, your agents, your landlords, tenants, and have that dialogue. I think it's important to explain your reasoning why, and have in your mind that things will change along the way, either with then what you're more comfortable with as things go along, or the fact that you don't want to overcommit and the government might take a step back here or there depending on what the R rate is, and really to be having that constant dialogue with clients and agents, and to be working together, not necessarily to dictate to them dictate to you, but everyone, just as we have been, sort of harmoniously going through things and really trying to work our way out of this in the best way possible, while still being safe, still using your PPE, not getting pressured into having a lot of people on the property, and not wearing your masks, your shoe covers, using your hand gel. These are stepping stones and they're goals, but it's not that things are going to be better at each stage and the virus has magically went away. I mean, I touched on personally, I think I'll still be doing a lot of what I do now until the 17th of May, but I'll keep that in mind to be reviewing it. But again, as long as you're explaining that to people and going through the reasons why, I think that it'll be positive for everyone, really. It's a step out of things, but it really is to know your own mind before you maybe start those conversations.
No, I agree. It's definitely, I think, a case of now looking at all of what you've just said, looking at your processes, looking at your PPE, your usage of, and not just yours, everybody you're working with, if you're self-employed or employed clerks, and getting it all written down and very clear in your mind exactly what you're going to do going forward. And you could easily align it to the steps. So as step one happens, it's going to be literally business as usual, in as much as nothing has changed. Everything as has been running for the last couple of months is going to be exactly the same. And then maybe align it to those steps. And in a way, when you think about it, if the government takes a step back, then your protocol takes a step back. Therefore, your client understands exactly what's happening. It's very well aligned. And then that way, as it also moves forward and we get to the point where, social activities, the ability to move about, to talk and interact, which we're hoping it will be effectively from 21st of June onwards, step 4 comes into play, then the relaxation and the business as usual then come. So you could align that quite easily to the steps and have it written down. But I think certainly as a business owner personally, and for everybody that I talk to and I train, it's something I would definitely be advocating. So write that down, get a protocol template so that you can see exactly what you're going to be doing, when you're going to be doing it, and then it's also effectively communicated to your clients that everybody's on the same page. And then when things do change and you'll need to change with it, everybody understands it and everybody's ready for it. I think the same as anything, forearmed is forewarned.
Yes, exactly.
Great, lovely. Well, I hope that's been useful for all of our listeners today. I will be writing up a blog and I will be designing a protocol template, which will be available on Inventory Base shortly. But in the meantime, if you do have any questions or queries, you can contact us via email, sian@inventorybase.com, or you can go into Inventory Base Academy or inventorybase.co.uk to access our blogs, our webinars, our podcasts, and any other kind of information that you would like. We've also got a closed Facebook group with a budgeting amount of experienced and new clerks right across the UK, all there helping, supporting each other through these difficult times and also through the not so difficult times. We enjoy each other's company, look at what we're doing as professionals. So if that's something that you're interested in, then please do drop me an email and I can give you that link. That's Sian@inventorybase.com. Melissa, thank you as always. Great conversation, a lot to think about today. And I've got no doubt at all that when we come to our next podcast, we'll probably be touching on this, because this isn't just this one podcast conversation. I think this is something that's going to be continuing all the way through, certainly up until hopefully we reach the end of June.
Yes, I think this is one that will continue and will evolve. And then hopefully each time we do a podcast, things will be improving and we'll be able to touch on that as we go.
Yeah, absolutely. I really do hope that. And in the meantime, as I said, if anybody's got any queries, wants to have a chat, etc., then I'll leave also my details on the Inventory Professional Transistor page, and you'll be able to see that on both our Apple and Spotify accounts. So thanks for everybody for joining us today, and look forward to speaking with you all again at the next Inventory Professional podcast. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Inventory Professional Podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, subscribe to our podcast now and share the love. This podcast was brought to you by Inventory Base, providers of industry-leading property inspection software, accredited training, and on-demand property reports.